Welcome to the Vermontijuana podcast. I am your host, Eli Harrington. The Vermontijuana podcast is where we elevate the state. Coming to you from the Green Mountains here in beautiful Vermont. We're talking cannabis culture, cannabis community, business, entrepreneurship, legalization, medical marijuana, and of course, hemp and CBD. Stay tuned. We've got a great episode today. Invite you to join us and elevate the state at vermontijuana.com and at Vermontijuana on social media. Let's go. Welcome back to our returning listeners and happy 2020. And hello to our new listeners. Excited to have new people joining us, subscribing. If you're not familiar, if you're new to this, what I like to do is usually talk about a little bit of news. I'm having an extra special segment from January through May. This is a Vermont political update. It won't be in every update, in every single episode, right? But we start with the national news. We'll talk about some political updates, and then we've got our feature. And our featured interview today is with Andrew McEwing. Amazing guy. I'll give you the full rundown, but I am going to guarantee you this. I guarantee you this. You are going to laugh out loud, and you're going to well up, right? I don't know if you're going to shed an entire tear, but you're going to both laugh and probably cry, depending on how you define cry in this episode. If that doesn't happen, if you subscribe and you listen to that interview with Andrew, and you don't both laugh out loud and shed a tear, listening to him talk about how he, as a red hat wearing farmer from Franklin County, military veteran, someone who thought, in his words, medical marijuana was bullshit, has come all the way around and how we've become good friends. One of the best interviews we've ever done, extremely powerful, very excited to share that with you. Our first national story comes to us courtesy of Marijuana Moment. If you're not on Marijuana Moment, check it out. It's the best place to get congressional updates, national news. They keep expanding, are doing amazing work. Lindsay Bartlett, experienced cannabis journalist and writer, submitted a report in Marijuana Moment that talked about both Jerry Jones and Tom Brady have been asked about cannabis in the recent past, in the last few weeks. We've got the Super Bowl, aka the big game, coming up. I don't think I'm allowed to call it the Super Bowl. The big game is coming up, so we're going to be talking a lot about football. And as we know, cannabis is still a banned substance. As Marijuana Moment also reported, a panel just came out saying that CBD they thought is mostly hype. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but one of the things that Marijuana Moment did a great job of was embedding the audio. So you can go listen to Jerry Jones talk about medical marijuana, and you can also listen to Tom Brady's silky smooth voice right here.
Yeah, I know there's been talks about that in the NFL as well, and I think the stigma is being removed, and hopefully they're doing a lot of research into whatever benefits there may come from it. So I don't know enough about it. I'm sure a lot of experts out there that could weigh in, but these are the signs of the times, and things are changing, and progress is good.
Tommy, good luck on Sunday, and we will talk to you on Monday.
Meanwhile, out on the campaign trail, it's worth giving people sort of a reminder. We had Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg double down on their anti-cannabis reform stances most recently. Bernie had come out and made a splashy announcement and sort of reiterated kind of his support, which he did not do in 2016, you should note. Tom Steyer, who's that? Yeah, right, exactly. Came out and said that he supports decriminalization and legalization nationally. But it is a good time to remind people that Elizabeth Warren is somebody who's got an A grade from NORML, is somebody who's co-sponsored legislation. And so, me personally, I voted for Bernie in 2016. I don't mind telling people this. I wrote him in rather than participate with either of the other candidates. But I got to say that going back and doing a little bit of research, it's really worth people taking a look at track records. Elizabeth Warren is somebody who is not a big fan of cannabis early on, but has come quite a long way. So when you're looking at all the candidates, this is an issue that's going to come up more and more on the national campaign trail. Encourage you guys, again, check out Marijuana Moment. They've done all the best reporting on this and have it all in one place. It's a great place to go get caught up, especially on the candidates. Our third news story is regional. For those of us that live here in the Northeast, regional politics, a lot of stuff is happening. I just want to run down each state real quick. We're going to get into Vermont in more detail with a very in-depth Vermont political insider update. Some of you might end up skipping past that. Some of you are here just for that, and the rest of this is kind of just icing on the cake, right? So let's look around the New England region. We've got Connecticut, where top lawmakers have again signaled that they're going to look at tax and regulate this year. Now, they've been building up their medical program in Connecticut. New Jersey has been talking about it quite a bit, and New York is obviously the prize. So Connecticut's seeing the money, and it's been a few years, but the infrastructure is kind of being built for them to really move forward. So 2020, I think they might end up being the New England state that does the most. We'll see. In Rhode Island, meanwhile, they're talking about a state control system. Now, Rhode Island is a place that we thought was going to legalize before Vermont was going to tax and regulate right along with us, or before us here in Vermont. And they've really been dragging their feet, and slower than a lot of people had expected. They're now discussing a state-controlled system, much like states like Vermont and many others that have state liquor stores, in which the state would be the retailer. Now, we have talked about this in Vermont, and the reason it did not go far, or it was kind of a non-starter, because of federal prohibition. The idea was that the state could not be involved in distributing a federally prohibited, federally illegal substance. Now, I'm not sure what the legal argument in Rhode Island is that might negate that, but that's what's being discussed. New Hampshire, behind the times as always, except when it comes to presidential primaries, they're talking about decriminalization and legalization. And we'll see. We wish our best to our friend Matt Simon from the Marijuana Policy Project over there, really fighting the good fight in a state that, loves the freedom to kill itself and not the freedom to legalize weed. So, elsewhere in New England, Massachusetts is making big news, in part because of how licensing is playing out on the ground. This is something I've been ranting about on Twitter and with lawmakers in Vermont, about kind of when you say you want to prioritize social equity or economic equity licenses, what does that do when you actually have the alternative of fast money through established big companies, corporations, multi-state operators, right? So Massachusetts made a really big deal out of their attempts to really prioritize social equity. And they kind of came up with a formula, but it wasn't super well defined up front, of how they wanted to make sure that people who were minorities that had been negatively impacted, and people who were small business owners, people who lived in the communities that were going to be operational, that these people could get licenses. So they said, we'll figure this out. We're going to create a system of priorities. We're going to make sure economic empowerment and social equity licensees get to participate. Lo and behold, what happens? As the Wu-Tang Clan tells us, cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar bills, y'all. What that means is that once the tills open, right? Once a dispensary opens for business and that dispensary and the state are now making money from legal cannabis sales, that's where the administrative focus goes, keeping that money flowing in. Now, licensing is still an issue and they need to license people quickly, right? Well, who's easier to license? A small micro business, that doesn't have $1 million in the bank, or a multi-state operator that can point to a dispensary in Pennsylvania they've operated and says, we've got unlimited money in the bank, we paid off the locals, we're ready to go. Boom. So in Massachusetts, we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, small business owners, minority applicants who are pushing back against the state commission saying, hey, you said that we were going to be able to participate. We submitted our paperwork. We did our jobs. The licensing board is not doing theirs. Some of these people have waited 600 days to get a response. Some of these people have been paying rent on buildings, that are not allowed to operate for months, if not over a year, in the instance of some of this. And I'll point back to the Boston Globe. I believe it was Felicia Gans who did this reporting, or Naomi Martin, one of the two. But there's a story in the Boston Globe and a whole series of reporting. It's kind of becoming thematic with people interrupting control board meetings and saying, hey, nothing happens until we get our licenses. We've been waiting. We've done our job. We followed the rules. So we're watching that play out because Massachusetts really made some waves as far as their attempts to empower social equity, minority applicants. And what we're finding is that that is hard when you're putting that up against the ease and the financial incentive of having large corporations, multi-state operators come in and just open up shop. So we'll see. This is something for other states, especially us here in Vermont, to be wary of. But encourage you to check out that news happening around the region. In the meantime, let's go hear a quick ad, and then let's get into our Vermont Political Insider Update and our featured interview for our late January 2020 edition. Do you guys hear that? That's the sound of prime advertising time. I'm on the edge of my seat. I want to hear this Political Insider Update. It's valuable. It took me, Eli, hours and hours of time to collect and get this information together. This is the interesting stuff. So, you, a Vermont cannabis company, CBD, head shop, online, ancillary service, this is where you want to be advertising. You, somebody who's listening to this podcast, this is where you want to be finding out about events, about deals, about discounts, about classes, all of this good stuff. So we're in this together in this craft cannabis media scene and this little podcast. So I want to encourage you guys, help me spread the word. Vermontijuana at Gmail, at Vermontijuana. Let's get some advertisers in here. You guys know that I'm very loyal, stay true to my friends, and have a lot of loyal day one followers. So we're going to get more of this out, and I suspect we'll be full up with advertising by the next week. But in the meantime, I created a special one just for you guys. This is so ridiculous it might become a real product, but here's a sample of what we can do with some advertising. Yeah! This episode of the Vermontijuana podcast is brought to you by CBD's Nuts. That's right, CBD's Nuts, the new delicious, nutritious snack from Vermontijuana. You're going to love CBD's Nuts with over 100 milligrams of Vermont-sourced CBD and an assortment of cashews, almonds, peanuts. CBD's Nuts make for a great snack. Bring it with you on the road, healthy, nutritious. They also make a great gift and over 100 milligrams of CBD. Make sure to CBD's Nuts today. Item number 1 is the legislative update. So, S54 is the name of the Tax and Regulate bill. Last year, in 2019, it passed the Vermont Senate. It is currently in the House, where it is scheduled to be discussed by the Ways and Means and Appropriations Committees. Now, these are the two quote-unquote money committees. They're going to discuss how much revenue we'll expect from this bill and how much money it's going to cost to set it up. That second question is very critical to Governor Scott and many other policymakers. Right now, this bill is being discussed in other House committees to get input. House Agriculture Committee, the Natural Resources Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee. So they're trying to build consensus. They will theoretically go and amend this bill, talk to leadership, and see if it will be pushed forward. There is nothing scheduled presently for it to be on the House Ways and Means or Appropriations Committee. We expect that to happen at earliest, probably the second week in February. So stay on top of that. Item number 2, it is election year 2020, and we have had some big announcements dominating the early political news. Now, the 2020 campaign at the top of the ticket, we've got Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, who has been a proponent for cannabis reforms for 20 plus years. He's very well known as being out front and historically correct on this issue, and it served him well politically as he is the Lieutenant Governor, very popular statewide, has survived some tough elections. Republican Governor Phil Scott has been an opponent of cannabis reforms. He did let legalization take effect after vetoing it the year before in 2017. However, with Lieutenant Governor in the race, you have to think that cannabis will be more prevalent of an issue. So we've already seen the Governor, Phil Scott, talk about using potential tax revenues to fund after-school programs, but this has all been really abstract, and I think we can trust him not to immediately start supporting this and make this a campaign plank. That doesn't mean there's not a way for him to get on board with some other moderate reforms or incremental changes, but the aerial impact of cannabis on this election, and with it being an election year, we've got a lot of other Vermont politicians who are trying to metaphorically level up, whether that's Senator Tim Ash in Vermont running for lieutenant governor, whether that's Chittenden County Representative Dylan Giambattista running for state senate. It's going to be campaign season for everybody. And I think what that means is that we might actually see less cannabis discussion and more focus on some of these other sexier issues. There's a youth climate lobby in the State House every Friday. These kids are begging governors and representatives to do something about climate change. We've seen discussion of livable wage already become sort of heated and seeing some fractures. So there's a lot of work to be done politically on other issues that are not cannabis, and we see that taking up a lot of the legislature's time. We'll know in the next 2 weeks from leadership and from the House Speaker and from the actions of these committees what we can expect and what kind of action we might see. Stay tuned. S54 is the bill. Vermontijuana.com has a write-up and the link to the full text. Our third and final news update from the Vermont State House has to do with the Agency of Agriculture and the hemp program. We've seen the Agency of Agriculture and the Senate and House Agriculture Committees work really effectively in implementing hemp legislative changes, updating the program along the way. It's grown 10x from about 100 registrants to about 1,000 registrants, just growers alone, in the last 2 years. So we've seen this agency work together with the legislature, and the legislation that we're talking about right now is S-194. You've seen this on the Vermontijuana Instagram page. Senator John Rogers, himself a Vermont hemp farmer from up there in the Northeast Kingdom in Glover, he has filed a bill that would basically give people legal standing to sue people for bad seed. So like many other hemp farmers, he had issues with seed that was supposed to be feminized. It was not. Germination rates were not as advertised. And so this bill would at least give Vermont farmers some legal recourse. Now, this is potentially a big deal nationally, as this is an issue that we've seen more and more of, and we're seeing companies that are making genetic patents. So states getting into the business of legislating and regulating seed sales for hemp and cannabis, kind of a big deal. Stay on top of that S-194. I am so excited for today's featured interview. It is with Mr. Andrew McEwing. Andrew is somebody who, out of all the amazing, incredible, diverse people I've met through cannabis, he is one of the most unique, and his cannabis story is so unique. This is a guy who, as you'll hear, he's got a Vermont accent, and, you know, he lives in Franklin County. He's a farmer. He's a veteran. He's somebody who, I jokingly say during our interview, him and I wear different red hats, right? And he's somebody who's become a great friend through cannabis and had somebody whose life has been changed. You're going to hear his story, and I guarantee through our interview, I guarantee this. If you're a subscriber, I will give you your money back if this does not happen. And if you are not a subscriber, become one based on this guarantee. I guarantee that during our about half-hour conversation, you're going to both well up and maybe even shed a tear and laugh out loud, because Andrew is just such a practical, pragmatic guy. A lot of people have relatives, you know, sort of like Andrew, who are just straightforward, straight shooters. And, you know, I love talking with somebody who was raised in a conservative background, and as he will tell you, hated marijuana. He thought medical marijuana was bullshit, okay? And now this is a guy who is like a grow friend. You know, he comes to all of our cannabis events. His life has been changed. And most significantly, we talk about opiates and opioid use disorder. Andrew's a guy who, you know, has been in AA and has been clean for the last 15 years. And he talks about that and his struggles with that substance, but also talks about being somebody who uses opiates for pain management, and literally was taking a lethal dose, okay, of both morphine and Oxycontin. And somebody for whom cannabis has been a life changer and has dramatically reduced the amount of opiates that he takes. Now, he never had to struggle with opiate addiction, in part because he went through so many other things, and you'll hear him talk about that. But using THC, using medical marijuana with opiates has allowed him to reduce his intake of morphine from 150 milligrams down to 60. Okay, so Andrew's just an amazing guy, an incredible friend, and as you'll hear, he's got some really wild wisdom about how kind of learning about cannabis and medical marijuana, something that he didn't want to do, had to be forced to do in an intervention with his doctor so he would try it, how it changed his life and really changed his perception on kind of politics and what he had been told, and why he's such an amazing advocate to have as a guy who really values and appreciates medical cannabis. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, my very good friend, amazing medical advocate, farmer, grower, medical cannabis patient, Mr. Andrew McEwing. Welcome. Tell us who you are.
I'm Andrew McEwing, and I grew up here in Vermont. I was originally born in Anchorage, Alaska, another legal state. And you know, I grew up in a normal Republican household. My dad had a small business. It was, we grew up all working for the business. In my family, we were, you know, we didn't do drugs. It was like we were a non-drug family. We, you know, McEwing's just didn't smoke pot.
Right. And we should say, how old are you right now in 2020?
Well, I'm 52.
Okay.
And
Okay. So you're not quite a baby boomer.
Right.
But you came up in kind of the 80s and 90s.
Absolutely.
Really.
Love the 80s.
Yeah, and I've seen pictures at your house of fresh face you as a CB, right?
Yeah.
So were you guys a military family too?
My sister's in the military, and I was in the military. But my father originally worked for the FAA, and his main passion was airport engineering. And we came back here to take over my grandfather's company. He had a small oil company that was home heating oil. And it was just my cousins and my uncle. And we were a tight family. I didn't get babysitters. I went with cousin Jamie, delivering oil after school. I went with Uncle Dick to work on furnaces after school. I went with Uncle Jim. Everybody was an uncle. And everybody was an uncle or a cousin or somehow related.
Right.
And those that didn't, were like, we got to take the brat,
Right. And this is in Franklin County, right?
No, this is down here in Essex.
We're down. Oh, okay.
And I moved to Franklin when I was in my 30s or early 30s. I've been up in Franklin and Bakersfield for 21 years.
Okay, but you grew up more here in Chittenden County.
Yeah, right.
We're here at Essex at the Lang
Yeah.
Barns, thanks to the Langs. What was it like in Vermont? At that point in time, and kind of were you like Vermont's always got a reputation as sort of being a hippie haven, right? But you sounds like you didn't really fit that mold. And here in the '80s, it was probably kind of a different time, and you guys being a family that was maybe conservative, had business.
Oh, absolutely.
What was the scene like? And did you ever, smoke pot in high school?
No,
or?
I never did. I always had the adage that, McEwings don't do drugs. And, we could have all the pills and painkillers from the doctor that, that we wanted. We just, and I smoked cigarettes. I just didn't smoke pot. But my family, it was all right to drink. And as long as you got up the next day and went to work and took care of your family, having a couple drinks was all right. Unfortunately, I was an alcoholic by the time I was 21.
Wow.
The drinking age was 18 back then. And, I had, the 3 or 4 weeks before I went into the Navy, I got into my first DWI car accident. And it was at a time where I was going to the Navy and they made it go away before I could go into the Navy. And, it was like that the whole time. It was
just kind of accepted, in the you just kind of get fucked up, and that's what young guys do, right?
Yeah, it was like I had to drive home. I was too drunk to walk. And times have changed so much since then. Thank God. I've been sober now. I've been in AA for 30 years, but I've been sober for 15 years consecutively this time.
Congratulations.
Out of the last 30 years, I've had 25 years of sobriety, off and on. And, in AA, smoking pot was a nay. It was
right, nothing.
No.
Except cigarettes and coffee, I guess.
Yeah, cigarettes and coffee, were the two, caffeine and cigarettes were the staple. We didn't even eat. We just drank coffee and smoked cigarettes,
Yeah. Well, you got out of the Navy, and then, what'd you end up getting into as far as your work? Did you follow in the family business, or?
I ended up going to culinary school after I got out of the Navy, and I got a degree in culinary arts, and I got a degree in psychology, and from Champlain, and I ended up getting married. It was an alcoholic 80s lifestyle, early 90s, late 80s lifestyle. You ran hard, and it was tough. Drugs were just, there was a lot of cocaine. I remember back in the high school, but
in high school,
but we never did. I never did it. It was drugs, and I didn't want anything to do with it. Just I bought into the Just Say No. This is your brain on drugs. All those campaigns I bought into.
Yep.
And never smoked. I never knew what smoking was about. I never, I thought it was just a way, the hippies could get smoked up without getting bothered and harassed. And I was like, if they get a job, they wouldn't smoke,
Right. Right. I mean, you're describing kind of like, almost like the bad guy stereotype in an 80s movie, right?
Yeah,
and you're like,
absolutely.
You losers get a job, and you're like the jock or the car guy or the whoever. And, it's funny to imagine that now, but I think what people who are younger don't realize is that now there's not as much stigma around being a stoner.
No.
But if you look at a movie like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right?
Right.
Jeff Spicoli's a loser. He's an idiot. He's a bad guy in that movie. And it seems like that's kind of how things were here, and it's easy to understand why, you would fall into that mindset. Because I got to imagine not a lot of people in the Navy, and then not a lot of people in culinary school.
Right.
Although I don't know, kitchens are kind of notorious for partying.
Well, when I was in the kitchens, I had access to alcohol, and that was my drug of choice was alcohol. I was like, one of my closest friends was my boss back then, and he fired me because I was such a drunk that he couldn't keep me on. And as soon as I got out of rehab, the next day he hired me back. He said, "Oh, you're sober, you need a sponsor, and you need a job, and I'll give you both." And it was taken care of. And, smoking pot was never even a question, never even a desire, never even a second thought. I just didn't do it. It wasn't my thing.
Right.
Like drinking was my thing.
Right. Well, and like you said, then in the program, AA is very anti other substances, right?
Absolutely.
Total sobriety. So, how do you come into contact with weed?
Well, I was in a car accident 16, 17 years ago. I ended up breaking my back in 3 places. And then along the way, injuries from the Navy, I had to have my knees replaced in 2014. And so I was on all kinds of opioids. The doctors were feeding me opioids, jar after jar after jar after jar. But I never became addicted to them. I became dependent on it, but not addicted. I never ran out, and I never felt like, oh, I only got 2 left. I was never like that. I was always very mindful because of how much I was taking, because I had an alcohol problem. I didn't want a drug problem.
Right.
And
you were like a reluctant, you didn't, if you hadn't been in so much pain, you wouldn't have taken the pills at all.
Absolutely not. But it was life or death. It was like, I was bedbound and I was in a wheelchair for a while due to my injuries. And, the painkillers, the opioids and the morphine and the Percocet and, got me up, and I was able to run my farm. Back after the car accidents, I could no longer cook in the kitchens because I couldn't stand up for long periods of time. And working in the kitchens is a lot of standing and a lot of movement. And
you're running around or on your feet all the time.
Just couldn't do it. And the painkillers weren't even helping me do with that. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do for an income. So I had 23 acres of land up in Bakersfield, so I started growing beef, and that was a way of keeping the pastures mowed, and we raised some extremely good beef. We were about 7 grades above prime, 7 to 10 grades above prime, and we were $6.50 a pound hanging weight, which was like twice the cost of prime back then. And, we made a good living. And then when I could no longer, the animals were getting too big. They were, 1,500, 1,800 pounds on the hoof, and, they were dressing out at 1,000, 1,100 pounds. And, to get stepped on or to get pushed aside, it was really dangerous to my back. And, so we made the decision to go into chickens, and I started raising for a restaurant in St. Albans, and we would grow 200-300 chickens a year, and then it got necessary to get into butchering chickens because I was spending all my money having them butchered. So we bought butchering equipment and got into that line of work, and we were butchering over 1,000 birds a year, and it just worked out. Finally, this opioid epidemic came around, and the doctors weren't as free with the narcotics as they used to be. And, they were starting to talk about, I was in more pain, and I kept telling them to raise me. In the beginning, I was taking about 150 milligrams of morphine and another 135 milligrams of oxycodone.
How frequently?
Oh, that was the day supply.
Wow.
So, I was functioning. I was fully functioning. I had been on them for 17 years. And, I never had that draw, but I was in pain still. And opioids only work so well, and then you have to increase. And
those are crazy numbers, talking about 100 milligrams of morphine and
150 milligrams of morphine.
Wow, daily.
That was insane. And I was asking the doctors to increase me, and they were like, "We can't. You're at a lethal dose." I was like, "What do you mean I'm at a lethal dose?" They were like, "If we gave your dose to a normal person, it would kill them." And that kind of scared me. But and I was like, "Well, you got to do something for me." And they were like, "Well, we can offer you medical marijuana." I was like, "I'm not smoking that shit. I'm not going to be a druggie too." And my wife and my doctor got together, and along with my sponsor in AA, and they decided that I should try this, and that I hadn't had a problem with the opioids. I've been able to manage those, so I should try the marijuana and see if that worked. And I was reluctant, and I thought all those hippies just wanted to be, get the state off their back.
You thought medical marijuana was bullshit.
I totally thought it was bullshit. Yeah. I was like, if medical marijuana was so great, I'm like, how come the pharmaceutical companies aren't all over it? How come the government hasn't made it legal? How come, and I was like, I was really in the dark. I was really, I had this one paradigm in my head of what marijuana was, and I was so wrong. You know what I mean? It was like the story that I had made up in my head about marijuana. It wasn't based on fact. It was based on scare tactics from the 80s. To just say, no, this is your brain on drugs. This, the war against marijuana, the war against illicit drugs. And I was like, I don't even want to try it, And
yeah, that scene of having, doctor, wife, sponsor come to you and have an intervention, and like beg you to try weed.
Yeah.
That's quite a scene, like pretty unique experience,
It was.
So what was the first thing, do they take you out back and give you a joint or, put on a Led Zeppelin record or like, what was that?
No, it was pretty nonchalant. I went over to my friend, my friend's house, who's my sponsor. And he had been smoking. He has neuropathy in his feet, and he's been smoking for 60 years. And I asked him, I said, "Do you have a joint, or do you have a bowl, or anything I can try?" And he was like, he handed me a half a joint and said, "Knock yourself out." And I took 2 puffs, and I was pain-free. And I was like, oh my God, it's a freaking miracle. And the first thing is out of my mouth was, how much does it cost, and where do I get some? And my friend Walter was like, I can help you out with that. And, we started buying from the dispensary, Walter and I. I wanted Walter to have a safe place to pick up his product. And I wanted a safe place to pick up my product. I was always worried about tainted marijuana But the quality I was getting at the stores were really bad, and and it was expensive. And I was like, Walter's on Social Security disability, and so am I, because of my accidents. And I was like, we can't afford this. We were spending $300-400 a month at the dispensary. And being a farmer, I was like, I should be able to grow this stuff. So I started growing, and it helped out so much. Being around the plants lifted my spirits up. Which when you're in a lot of pain, you tend to be down, and you tend to be in bed, and you tend to be grouchy. But when I was caring for these plants, my outward my inward feelings were great. I was like, wow, I can't wait to see how much they grew today. And I go downstairs in the basement and water them and take pictures, and it was caring for these plants were probably the biggest part of doing the whole marijuana thing. And then as I got into the marijuana, I needed less opioids. And I went back to my doctor, and I'm like, let's make a cut. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, let's cut me back on the opioids. And he was like, nobody cuts back on opioids unless they're forced to. I said, well, I don't need as much. And I cut back a third that day. And I did it with relatively ease. And the next year, I cut back another third. So right now, I'm on 2/3 what I was taking. So I'm on 60 milligrams of morphine and 90 milligrams of oxycodone. So I've cut it back considerable.
Yeah.
And I feel better. I'm not grouchy. My son says, Dad, you're not a dick when you're smoking. And he's 21, so he must know.
Yeah. Well, anytime you get a young kid to say, right, especially your son to give you that kind of credit, that's about as high praise as it gets, right?
Yeah.
That's almost like him saying you're cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. The plant therapy. I know that's been such a cool part of legalization, and even a lot of the hemp stuff is so many more people are appreciating it. How much fun it is to grow.
It is.
As a medicinal, sort of treatment for yourself and as therapy itself. The question you hit on it though, where do I buy it? How do I get it? Ending up growing for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You are able to, to function and at least do some gardening. Other people are more disabled, and they have caregivers. There's still some expense and a learning curve for how to get it set up. So kind of how do you learn how to grow? Or you just hop on YouTube and trial and error?
I hopped on YouTube, and everything I knew came from YouTube. And I watched these videos on how to plant and how to take clones. And I watched these videos on how to fertilize. And I went through the gamut of fertilizers. I started out with the ultra cheap stuff, and now I'm doing Roots Organic, which is fairly expensive, but the product comes out so nice. Mm-hmm. And when I think about growing a tent, I'm thinking about what strain do I want? What strain is going to help me with my chronic pain?
Right.
And I want a fairly strong indica and a fairly strong sativa for the daytime, and an indica for at night where I can sleep. And and I ended up, Walter was his severe pain, and I ended up with a girl that had 150 plates and screws in her head and couldn't take opioids. She was hit by a dump truck, and she was. This
is your friend who I met before too.
Yeah, Brooke. Yeah. And so I started helping these people out because they were in chronic pain, and the companies, the dispensaries have to grow for a wide range of disabilities and symptom alleviation. And I can focus myself on pain management. And so I ended up growing for a couple of people. My friend Dave, he has chronic pain, he was having a hard time sourcing his marijuana. He couldn't afford the dispensaries, which I don't blame him. It's so expensive.
Well, and all you guys are, and everybody you're talking about are people who are, who are older and who might not be, might not want to be on the illicit market, right? Exactly. And they don't want to, like, what are you going to do? Go on Facebook and ask people if they, where do I buy weed? And, I go to the State House and it's a lot of the same people, and they're looking up the priceofweed.com to figure out how much it should cost. And so, that's a real thing. And I know part of why legalization is such a big deal, because not only can you grow, your 2 plants and you can give it away to people. Mm-hmm. In addition, and you're also can be a patient and a caregiver, but then also being able to teach other people, right? And sort of pass it along. And that's the really cool part, because it is, and it's not all the dispensaries' fault. Like you said, they've got to grow a wide range of stuff. Right. They're overregulated. The state hasn't really figured it out, and I'll ask you what you think about that after. But this is kind of part of what the culture is, and you're somebody who came in reluctantly, right, at best, and you still found your way to the same part of the culture that all the old hippies have done, as far as sharing with patients, giving it out to people, teaching them how to grow, giving them seeds, giving them clones. I think it's just part of the plant and part of the culture that
the culture
becomes part of you, whether you are thinking it's going to come or not.
Well, the culture is amazing. It's not the homeless, jobless. I'll do anything for weed. Let me paint your Porsche green.
Right.
And for I can get enough weed for the weekend. It just, the culture, is so inclusive. You've got doctors, you've got lawyers, you've got all different types of, all walks of life that are bound to each other by this one plant. And frankly, once I started smoking, I was like, why is this illegal? Why was this illegal for so long? This is stupid.
Right.
Let's make this legal, and, let's make alcohol illegal, because alcohol does a hell of a lot more damage than weed ever did. It just, alcohol kills every major cell in your body, from your toenails to your hair, and all the way in between. And, the worst thing you got to worry about weed is getting the munchies.
Right. Which that's like you said, the events and kind of the culture and the community is really, really nice to see, because I know, I've got so many different friends, that I've made through cannabis, including you. Right. And like, we're 2 people who, I'm sure voted for different people for president last time around,
I'm pretty sure we did.
And probably will. We both wear different kind of red hats.
Yeah.
But like you said, you're reckoning with the politics of it. Right. And kind of where you're at now, as far as like, oh shit, I was lied to this whole time. Right.
That's how I feel too. I felt like I was deceived.
Yeah.
I was deceived. I was on somebody's agenda that wasn't giving me all the information and all the facts. Mm-hmm. If we can make this something scary and make this, demonize it, then all the Republicans will step in line, and all the conservatives will step in line, and they'll preach
all the
to
parents, anybody who's afraid of it. Fear's a powerful motivator.
Oh, absolutely. And as long as we kept it away from them, for they never knew what it was, then we could keep them in fear. Mm-hmm. And coming from, I was a staunch opponent of it. I was like, absolutely, we should, it should be illegal. What does anybody need this plant for anyways? Until I cut back 2/3 on the opioids I was taking, and I was taking a lot of opioids, and I was like, this is insane. Yeah. And along that time, I met this doctor. He was an OD, a doctor of osteopath, and his name was Dr. Dustin Sulak from Maine, and he was like, people that take opioids and cannabis products need 20 to 80% less opioids in their treatment. They find that they don't need to have the increases that opioids alone have, that they can get by on far less, And he was the one, anytime you take an opioid product, I should be taking a cannabis product with that. And that changed my life. And I was like, 2/3 of the amount of narcotics I was taking, and I'm off of them, and I feel great. I'm alert.
Having cannabis, like you said, having a doctor think about it as a supplemental thing that's enhancing the power of the opioid, so you don't need as much of it.
Right.
And I know he's become pretty famous as a medical cannabis doctor.
Yeah, he has.
Now, and thankfully,
absolutely, we need to in a form.
Well, so how do you, you're somebody who talks to, and we mentioned, you're up there in Franklin County, former farmer and former, and a veteran, and somebody who's over the age of 50, and on disability. You check a lot of the boxes of who politicians say they care about.
Right.
So, and especially conservatives,
Right.
So what's the reception that you get, and I think of it more as a generational thing than a political thing. And so what's the reception that you get, and what's the most effective argument for you when you talk to people about how it's impacted you?
I tell my story. Because if you go in and you try to muscle them and say, this is bad, cannabis is good, and cannabis, you got to let them make up their own mind. Conservatives want to make up their own mind on stuff after they've been spoon-fed the information. And right, wrong, or indifferent, they'll eat whatever most people will eat whatever you serve them. and they were served a pack of lies, and when it came to cannabis.
Yeah.
And it was I've talked to a couple of my representatives, and I don't tell them, I tell them my story, and I'm like, this is how I grew up. This is, what I believe in, and this is unacceptable now because the research, as little as it is coming back and saying this stuff isn't dangerous. This stuff is actually helping people. Israel is doing a lot of research on CBD and THC and all types of the cannabinoids in cannabis, and the Israeli army, if you have a traumatic brain injury or get blown up or get a shockwave from a missile or a bomb or anything, they immediately give you cannabis to help your neurons in your brain, and they say that helps protect the brain. And you listen to people that say that NFL football players with all their traumatic brain injuries, that and all the trauma to their bodies, they should be taking cannabis. Yet the doctors are so uneducated about this. I had to get educated on my own because my doctor knew nothing about it. He didn't know what type of a dose to give me. The other thing I found was freedom. Like with cannabis, there's not one that says at 6 o'clock you got to take this pill and this much of that pill, or you can smoke as much as you need to get the symptoms alleviated.
Right.
Relieve the symptoms.
Yep. As long as you got enough of it, right?
Right.
That's the only factor. You can make it into edibles if you want.
Right.
You can vaporize it. Mm-hmm. You can have concentrates and dabs. And like you said, you can kind of choose your own treatment.
Right.
Which is, I think, what people like. And start feeling pain, take a hit.
Right.
Maybe it's every 20 minutes for some people.
Yeah.
But it helps them, keep it kind of at ease.
I technically smoke in the nighttime when my back's bothering me the most. But I know people that smoke from the time they get up to the time they go to bed, and it's their only form of symptom relief in this age of opioid scare and epidemic. Doctors aren't giving out painkillers, and we have people in pain. And this helps pain. It helps my pain. My wife can actually have to help me downstairs to my basement, and I'll smoke some concentrate and be able to walk up on my own.
Wow.
And
yeah, it's that dramatic.
That's in 15 minutes time.
Yep.
I go from needing assistance to being able to do it on my own. That's groundbreaking stuff. And it's this little plant that we think is, you know what I mean? It's so easy to grow. It's a freaking weed. You know?
Right. You know, anybody really can do it. You know,
everybody can grow weed, but there's only a selective few that can grow good weed.
That's right.
But if you put your mind to it and you do the reading and the research on it, there's no reason why you can't grow your own medication and not be shackled by big pharma. You know, eventually I'm going to be getting off the opioids, and you know how freeing that's going to be. You know, like right now I'm a slave to them. I check my pockets 2 or 3 times before I leave the house to make sure I have enough painkillers for the day. Now, how obsessive compulsive is that?
Yeah.
You know, and I can carry a cannabis product like a vape pen with me, and boom, 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 I keep it right in my car. And I don't have to worry about smoking. I don't smoke in my car, but I know a lot of people do. And just because you smoke marijuana doesn't mean that you're going for pass out every time.
Right.
You're going for symptom relief most of the time. You just, I don't want to get so buzzed that I can't function, but I want to get enough into me so that my pain is gone,
right,
or at least manageable.
Have you tried, I mean, you've got serious needs for severe pain. Have you tried CBD? Does CBD do it for you, or a combination? Or
I found that that THC works the best.
Yeah.
A heavy dose of THC, usually from an indica, is what helps me most at night. I have a hard time sleeping because of the pain. The other thing is these opioids. I recently lost my son this summer to an opioid overdose. Now, he was addicted to the same things that I'm on and that the doctors are giving me freely. And he died from that. And that's scary. Here I am taking the same type of painkillers, opioids that killed my son. And I take it without a care in the world or a second thought. And that's painful. I don't want to say that I'm against opioids, because I'm not. I'm against the abuse of opioids. And, they talk about this. They say after a 30-day prescription of Percocet, 30 people out of 100 will be addicted. Out of a 60-day, prescription, 65% will be addicted out of 100. And out of 90, 85% will be addicted after 90 days of a prescription of opioids. That's ludicrous. That's crazy. And then what are we doing? We're shutting them right off. We're not even tapering them down. We're like, oh, you had too many. We're going to shut you off. We're making drug addicts. We're making illicit drug addicts.
And imagine you got a detox in prison, like my friend.
Yeah.
That's talk about a hard. I mean, mentally coming back from that, even. And that seems like a big part of this, which, it's tough with the psychology, because there is X amount of evidence that, schizophrenia can be enhanced if you have conditions, but I think in general, cannabis is usually a mood elevator.
I think so.
And people using it for anti-anxiety, and I don't think that we accept that as being, society maybe doesn't accept that completely yet. The idea that it's okay to smoke a joint and lift your mood. Even if, it's fine to go have a beer at lunchtime, or, go have a margarita at lunchtime or something like that. We're still kind of getting there, but that idea of medical cannabis for mental health,
right?
I think it'll be a while till we get there, but it
Look
certainly
at what
seems...
they've done with PTSD.
Right.
PTSD, and we have our military coming back, and, it's an unseen injury. It's a battlefield injury. PTSD is not an illness or a disorder. It's an injury.
Direct causation.
And the way we're treating our military is we're filling them full of opioids and pills and antipsychotics and all kinds of crap, when they could be really helped with a little bit of cannabis.
Right. And are you more open to the idea, because of your experiences with cannabis now, the idea of, psilocybin and mushrooms or MDMA or LSD, not for everybody necessarily, but as a PTSD thing, I think there's some research happening with that. Is that something that you're more open to now that you might not have been before? Or
I think so.
Is that still
I think so, but I'm not ready for it for me. I was looking at ayahuasca and people taking ayahuasca and walking away without opioid addictions. After a 3-day treatment of ayahuasca, I was like, this is amazing. We got to do research on these things. Some of these plant-based medications that we're getting, and
kratom, right? That's another one.
Kratom,
there's a lot of anecdotal, discussion, but no, no regulation, and I don't think it's really being studied. In the U.S. at least.
It's not being studied, and we need to study this. Maybe we have a whole, nature has a whole has a whole drugstore, and all we have to do is find them, find out what plants are given.
Yeah, do you think it's funny thinking back to you in the 80s, talking like a hippie about natural plant remedies and cannabis, and it's kind of it's like the Rocky IV thing. If I can change, then you can change.
Absolutely.
And we all can change together.
Absolutely. Cannabis has really opened my eyes up to. I was pretty much egocentric for the longest time. I thought about my pain, my ailment, my suffering, and when I started with the cannabis, I was like, I can help other people that are doing the same thing I'm doing. And it's given me friends. It's given me a culture. My wife doesn't smoke, and my son smokes. My son's autistic, and and he's come right out of his shell with smoking. Plus, it's something that we can do together, and and talk. Autism, strikes the conversation from you. When it's usually, I'm fine, and that's it, to having a half-hour conversation with my son, it's unlocked the communication between me and my son. And it's been nothing but a blessing. And you don't have to, you certainly can smoke until you're unaware of your surroundings and unaware of what's going on. But you can also just smoke for symptom relief and work out your regular day and, still take care of your errands, still take care of your day-to-day living and not be impeded or stuck on the couch. And, it all depends on what you want and what's good for you. And, I think with cannabis, we're taking the amount and the concentrate and, the concentration of THC right out of the doctor's hands and giving it to the patient, which is empowering.
Yeah.
It's very empowering for the patient to be able to say, I can smoke this or this or this, and I'll get the same relief as if I take this, this, or this. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That's where we need to be going. We need to empower the patient. The doctors need to research this. And, I think anytime, instead of giving a painkiller, they should give a prescription for an opioid. Not an opioid, but a prescription for a cannabis product. Mm-hmm. Anytime.
Start with CBD before you go to Percocet.
Yeah, start with CBD before you go to Percocet.
Right. There's a long ways in between those two.
Absolutely.
And the idea of getting
CBD
there.
CBD is legal in all the states now.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make cannabis legal. I think once it's legal, our war on drugs is just going to go away because there won't be one.
Right.
And the thousands and the millions and billions of dollars spent on eradicating, marijuana. It's the most asinine thing I ever heard of now. I was the one that was voting to give them more money,
Yep.
And
you've certainly done your service to to the cause as an advocate.
Yeah.
Now to make up and then some. If there was any thought about that. But yeah, this was great. Andrew, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for
special
having me.
special to share this. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and we'll get it out there widely.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate the chance that you wanted to hear my story. And thank you very much for listening.
Whew, all right. Thank you all for listening. That was really special. You guys heard my guarantee up front. If you did not laugh out loud and well up at some point during that interview, hit me up. I will refund your subscription completely. Whatever you paid for, I will refund it. But I want to thank you all for tuning in. Starting in February, this podcast will come out every 2 weeks. Subscribe on Apple. Look for it on SoundCloud. Look at the Vermontijuana.com website. Become a subscriber to the newsletter. And, of course, follow Vermontijuana on social media. We'll be coming back with more, including some hot political news coming up next week on probably Tuesday. So stay tuned. Thank you all for your support. Become subscribers. Check out the website. And above all, make sure to elevate the state.
Now I